Hi there, and welcome to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas, and thank you so much for being here with us today. I greatly appreciate you being such a proactive parent, and like you, I once had a child who was diagnosed with autism, and I was told that he could not recover and that I should drug him and try behavioral therapies, but my background as a craniosacral therapist studying the brain let me know that the brain could heal, and I didn't want to give up on my son either, just like you're not. You being here shows that you're looking for those resources. And I had to search, and it took me about a decade, but I figured it out, and today my son is fully recovered, and now I'd like to share the resources with you, and I've created a free online workshop that you can learn the 4 stages to naturally recover from the symptoms of autism, where I go through those 4 stages for you. And the first stage is healing the gut. Stage 2 is natural heavy metal detoxification. Stage 3 is clearing the co-infections like mold, Lyme, and strep. And then stage 4 is brain support and repair. So you can learn more about that at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/free workshop. No spaces, just free workshop. And that's there for you because, again, I like to make sure that you know what you need to do to recover your own child, and I like to be able to help you in that process if I can. And today's topic is really exciting. If you haven't heard of this one yet, I'm sure you'll be happy to know more about it. We are covering Microbiota Transplant therapy for treating GI problems in children with autism spectrum disorders. Now, we're going to explain further what microbiota and all that means. We have a specialist with us today, Dr. James Adams, and he is one of the foremost researchers in this field. But just so you know, some of the clinical trials that have gone on with the broad ranges of have reflected that the transfer of this microbiota from healthy humans to the GI of individuals with autism spectrum disorders has been, and I quote, reducing their GI symptoms, reducing their ASD symptoms, and increasing their diversity of gut bacteria. At the beginning of the study, the majority, 83 of the participants were classified as severe in autism diagnosis scale, and at 2-year follow-up, only 17% were still severe, and 44% no longer met the criteria for an autism diagnosis. And I've linked to this study at the page that I've created for today's notes. Show notes will be at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/46, just the numbers 46. So I'd like to give you a brief biography on Dr. Adams and introduce him to you today. Dr. James B. Adams, PhD, is the Director of Autism and Asperger's Research Program at Arizona State University. His research focuses on the medical causes of autism and how to treat and prevent it, including the areas of nutrition, including vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, carnitines, digestive enzymes, and special diets. And then also oxidative stress, gut problems, gut bacteria, toxic metals, and seizures. And he has published over 150 peer-reviewed scientific articles, including over 40 related to autism. He is also the president of the Autism Society of Greater Phoenix, the president of the Autism Nutrition Research Center, the co-leader of the Scientific Advisory Committee of the Autism Research Institute, and chair of the Scientific Advisory Board of the Neurological Health Foundation, and he also has an adult daughter with autism. So Dr. Adams, welcome, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thanks, Karen, for having me.
So I'm excited. You're such an expert in this field, and I honestly greatly appreciate that you are also part of sort of our community there with, being a parent of a child with autism. So, the challenges that people go through and the research and the struggles to search for things that are working to help children recover or at least improve their symptoms and help them to be happier and definitely to be healthier, because a lot of our kids hurt, and especially in their gut. So maybe why don't we start with, why is it, you've done a lot of research, why do you think that GI problems and autism symptoms might be due to this gut bacteria?
Right. So we did a study back in 2011 in which we looked at gut problems and children with autism, and we also evaluated their autism symptoms. And what we found was a very strong correlation that the children with autism who also had gut symptoms had more severe autism in looking at all of the major areas. They had worse speech, worse social interaction problems, worse physical and behavioral problems, worse sensory and cognitive problems. And so our hope then is if we can treat those GI problems, then we can reduce those autism symptoms from more severe to milder. So that was the first clue we had back in 2011. And since then, we've done a lot of more research to follow up on that.
And so why do you think that children with ASD have, so much abnormal gut bacteria?
There are many reasons. In our latest study, in which we looked at children with microbiota transplant therapy, we found that the mothers of children with autism had lower fiber consumption, and you inherit much of your microbiome from your mother. And so if you have less fiber, you're going to tend to have less healthy gut bacteria. A second problem we found was C-section births. In our study, over 2/3 of the children with autism were born by C-section. When you're born by C-section, then you are not exposed to some of the critical microbiota in the vaginal canal. And studies show that there's about a 50% chance that children born by C-section will miss a critical bacteria called B. infantis, which is the one bacteria that feeds on mother's milk and is able to grow and outcompete all the other bacteria in your gut. So if a child is nursing, then that will be the major initial bacteria that helps set the stage for a healthy bacteria in future. A third factor was shorter nursing by mothers of children with autism. So their children were nursed for a shorter period of time, and hence they got less of that critical mother's milk that has this special ingredient to feed this one strain of gut bacteria. And then even if you manage to get normal gut bacteria from your mother, another challenge is increased use of oral antibiotics during infancy, which tends to wipe out much of your normal gut flora. And then finally, children with autism tend to have more restricted diets, so they eat a lower diversity of foods, so that tends to give them less diverse gut bacteria, and they had somewhat lower fiber consumption. So it's really those 5 factors. It's no surprise that the children with autism in our study had chronic GI problems from infancy, and they were very resistant to treatment.
Right. And the lower diversity of foods in children with autism, I know that I work with parents and help walk them through the process, and picky eating is such a big deal. I mean, I know that a lot of the foods that they're eating, they become addicted, for one, to like things like gluten and casein, the proteins in wheat and dairy, due to the opiates that they can create. But then also the bad bacteria in the gut will crave the sugars and the sugars themselves, and the processed carbohydrates create sugars, and all of these things will feed on. So, switching to the positive diet, the right diet, is very, very important. But a lot of parents, do have trouble in doing that. So I'm thinking too, why don't we're going to take a short break right here. When we come back, we'll explain microbiota a little bit further, maybe for our listeners, and then talk about, kind of how we can make those issues kind of basically get some improvement in some of those issues between picky eating and in the gut bacteria. So you're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas. Stay with us. We will be right back.
Have you ever wondered why some children recover from their symptoms of autism while others never seem to get any better? After 13 years of research, Karen Thomas has recovered her own son from his symptoms of autism naturally. She now shares how she did it with you in her free webinar so that you can have the right resources and knowledge to help your child. The definition of recovery is to regain health. Karen offers this to you in 4 stages: healing the gut, natural heavy metal detoxification, balancing the co-infections of autism, brain support, and repair. Register now for this free webinar to help you know what you can do to help your child to sleep better, be more calm, improve focus, and reach their fullest potential to live a happy, healthy life. Go to naturallyrecoveringautism.com/free workshop, empowering parents with the resources to naturally recover autism from a...
Hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas, and again, I have created show notes for you today at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/46, just the numbers 46, and we are talking about the Microbiota Transplant and therapy that's used for treating GI problems in children with autism spectrum disorders, and we have Dr. James B. Adams here with us today. And before the break, we were talking about diversity, basically gut diversity, how this microbiota in the gut gets depleted in children with autism. And there is a direct gut-brain connection that's very, very important. And in next week's show, I'll be able to give you some more information directly on that as well. But Dr. Adams, I know picky eating is an issue for our kids, so we want to make sure that they're eating the right foods and not eating the bad foods. But why don't we also back up just a little bit? I'm thinking there might be parents listening who really aren't familiar with what microbiota is. And if you could just give an explanation of what it is and what it does for the kids, and maybe talk just for a second about that gut-brain connection, because it's so important.
Sure. So the microbiota are primarily the bacteria that live in your gut, and they're generally very helpful. They help you with digesting your food. They help produce certain key vitamins. Very important, they help to digest fiber and to convert it into a substance called butyrate, which is the major food for the cells that line your gut. So most people in the U.S. don't get enough fiber, hence the cells that line their gut are literally starving for this key nutrient and hence unhealthy and very vulnerable to disease. Also, your normal gut bacteria help defend you against bad bacteria that can cause serious GI disorders and even life-threatening disorders. And so your gut bacteria are very important. When you have a bowel movement, roughly half of that bowel movement is your gut bacteria. So there are a very large amount of gut bacteria living in your gut, generally keeping you healthy. But if your stool looks abnormal, smells abnormal, then that's a very good clue that you have abnormal gut bacteria.
So if somebody has abnormal gut bacteria, they're basically, we're talking about starting with switching over, of course, to the right diet. And I know that there are some certain supplements and things that can be helpful with that as well. But your research is around microbiota transplant therapy. So yes, there are these other things, and I would imagine that you do these other stages in your research as well. But in these studies that you've done, what are you finding with maybe explaining what microbiota transplant therapy is, and then and what you're finding, especially in children with autism spectrum disorders?
Sure. So microbiota transplant has primarily been used for people who have a serious gut infection called Clostridium difficile. It causes life-threatening, explosive diarrhea, and it affects 500,000 Americans each year. It kills 29,000 Americans a year. So it's a really deadly GI disorder. It can be treated with antibiotics, but it often comes back again and again. What's been discovered is that if you do microbiota transplant just one time, literally taking raw poop from a healthy person and put it by colonoscopy or rectal enema into a person with C. diff, they're cured of C. diff 90% of the time from one dose, usually within 2 to 3 days. So it is literally miraculous, and that's why the FDA allows it to be used and is becoming more and more widely used for resistant C. diff infections. We worked with a gastroenterologist out of Australia who had tried to treat children with autism, but he found that unlike with C. diff infections where one dose is enough, he found that children with autism were much harder to treat. So he treated them every day for 3 months, and slowly, gradually, he saw good improvements in GI symptoms. And surprisingly, their autism symptoms began improving too, according to their parents. So he was the one who guided us in developing the clinical protocol that we did a treatment study on.
And at the we were there at the Autism One conference together, and you're talking about knowing that the people that you're getting this raw poop from, they have to be obviously very healthy. You have to do a lot of screening with those people and making sure that that there isn't any transfer as they do with blood work. If somebody is getting a blood transfusion, kind of, for instance, like, you have to go through a screening process and make sure that these people have pretty clear gut bacteria and that they meet certain criteria. Is that right?
That's right. It's very, very important that the group we work with out of University of Minnesota does very careful screening, just like you would for a blood donation, and then a lot more screening beyond there to check for GI problems and other problems. And because usually very extensive screening is done, Microbiota Transplant has generally been very, very safe, very successful. But just a week ago, the FDA announced very sad occurrence of 2 serious injuries, 1 case leading to death of someone who received microbiota transplant. These were 2 people who were immunocompromised. They had weakened immune systems, and they received FMT, microbiota transplant, from a person who had a multiple drug-resistant bacteria. It wasn't affecting the donor. They had a healthy immune system, apparently, but it affected the 2 recipients and seriously injured one and killed the other. Luckily, we already checked for the chance of drug-resistant bacteria in our work, and so we are not significantly affected. But it is a concern, and that's why we don't recommend people do it at home, but do it under a research study.
Oh, so this one was done, somebody was just sort of doing it on their own.
We don't know the details yet of how it was done. I think so we don't know if it was done as part of a research study or not, but some groups, even for research studies, were not testing for these drug-resistant bacteria. We do test for them, and we also don't give it to people who are immune compromised. We make sure people have reasonable immune health before we treat.
Okay, great. Well, it's great to know that you guys are really screening for that too, so that you're a safe source. We're going to take a short break right here. You're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas. Stay with us. Hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas, and today we are talking about microbiota transplant therapy for treating GI problems in children with autism spectrum disorders. And we have Dr. James B. Adams with us, who is a research specialist in this field. And right before the break, Dr. Adams, you were talking about how you don't give these microbiota transplants to people with compromised immune systems, but children with autism often have compromised immune systems. So how do you know what level and if they're safe to give it to, if it's safe to give it to them?
So what we do is we check both for blood count to make sure they have normal amount of blood cells, especially white blood cells, and we also check to see that they have a normal functioning liver and kidney system for detoxification. And so the concern would be if someone were, say, on statins that suppress your immune system, or if someone had a serious infection like AIDS that weakens your immune system. That's the sort of people that would be at risk of being exposed to multiple drug-resistant organisms. But most people with autism, that shouldn't be a problem for.
Okay, so even though they have, lowered immunity, they're not at the level that you're talking about that are like severe, like immune compromised individuals, like much more so than autism.
I think it's better to say that most people with autism have an altered immune system.
Okay.
We especially are concerned about autoimmunity, that their immune system seems to be revved up against potential food allergens, so they're more reactive to foods, and there's evidence of autoimmunity of the immune system attacking the central nervous system. So again, most children with autism have an adequate immune system for fighting off typical infections like a flu or a cold or typical gut bacteria infections.
Okay, that makes sense.
And also I should point out the material we use is not raw stool. We work with University of Minnesota that purifies this, tests it extensively, so that what we end up with is over 99% pure gut bacteria. And so we can give that either as a liquid or in a pill form, just like a probiotic, and you just swallow it down just fine. So again, waste matter is all removed, and it's a highly, highly purified product, basically a pharmaceutical-grade product that's sufficient for us to do studies with FDA approval.
It's so nice too that you have multiple ways to be able to give it to especially children. You know, there are a lot of things they're not comfortable with, especially they might not be able to take a capsule. So being able to give it to them in a liquid form or maybe powder, or if they're willing to do an enema or a colonoscopy. I mean, not a colonoscopy, a colonic. That might be helpful as well. I know that you have done a lot of research. So your phase 1 treatment study, I'm wondering, so what treatments did you use and kind of what kind of results have you been seeing in these long-term follow-ups and the studies that you've been doing?
So we give our therapy a special name, Microbiota Transplant therapy, to differentiate it from standard fecal transplant, because standard fecal transplant is one dose, one time. What we do is a very intense therapy because kids with autism are much harder to treat than people with C. diff infections. So you do 2 weeks of vancomycin, an oral antibiotic to target specific types of pathogenic bacteria common in kids with autism like Clostridia. Then we do a bowel cleanse, just like you would for a colonoscopy. So a very extensive bowel cleanse with a partial day of fasting to really clean out as much gut bacteria as we can, and then high-dose microbiota from very healthy, carefully screened donors for 1 to 2 days, and then daily maintenance dose for another 8 weeks. And unlike with C. diff, where you see improvement in 2 to 3 days, for kids with autism, we find it takes weeks to see improvements in GI symptoms. But eventually, in our first study, 90% of the children had a big improvement in autism symptoms, in GI symptoms. On average, there was an 80% reduction in GI symptoms initially and about a 25% reduction in autism symptoms. We then followed up with the kids 8 weeks later, and we found those benefits remain. They were stable. We were thrilled. We thought this was great. We thought we were done. Very successful study. We published it. But then, a year later, 3 different families came up to me and said their child was doing better than ever, that they had been making slow, steady improvements since the study. So we did a follow-up study. So 2 years after treatment stopped, we followed up with every one of the 18 participants in our original study. None of them had dropped out. And we were thrilled to see that family after family, according to our professional evaluator, had a substantial improvement in autism symptoms, 47% reduction compared to baseline. So almost half reduction in autism symptoms. They're not cured, but they're greatly improved, some even below the cutoff now for autism. And again, there's some placebo effect. This is an open label study, so there's some placebo effect, but much of this effect seems to be real. And part of the reason we know it's real is we see a big improvement in gut bacteria. At the start of the study, the kids were missing 25% of their normal gut bacteria. At the end of treatment, they had normal amounts of gut bacteria, and incredibly, 2 years later, they had better than average gut bacteria, better than the typical child. So this suggests this is going to be a very long-lasting therapy and very beneficial for some time. So we're very excited about it.
Yeah, that is exciting. And then do you continue to do they take something on a maintenance dosage, or do you do this several week protocol or 3 months protocol, and then you sort of send them off to, with their parents to eat organically, do all the good things? Or is it a continuous maintenance type of thing that you have a product that you give them?
So we have a lot to learn about how to optimize this therapy, but in our original study, we treated them, as I said, for just 2 weeks vancomycin, the bowel cleanse, and then 8 weeks of daily microbiota therapy. And then we stopped. They had no maintenance doses, and yet 2 years later, still doing well. Now, they might have done even better if we'd given some maintenance doses, but that wasn't part of our study design. But so most GI benefits continued.
I'm sorry, we're going to take a short break right here, and you're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism. Stay with us. Hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism. We're talking with Dr. James Adams today about microbiota transplant therapy for treating GI problems in children with autism spectrum disorders. And before the break, Dr. Adams, you were mentioning this really amazing success rate that you're having with this, the research, and with these children and adults, I know as well. You have children and adults that you're working with that you're having great success with. And it also, I think it makes it so obvious if you're having such great results with this. I know there's a lot of research and we have all of that. That's a whole another whole show, but how the gut and the brain are directly connected from these organisms. They actually communicate with each other, and then there's neurotransmitters, brain messengers like serotonin and dopamine, and a lot of those receptors being made in the gut, and the brain needs those for focus and mood and sleep and appetite. And so the gut is so important. So before the break, we were talking a little bit about dosages and maintenance. And so can you just finish up on that? We kind of got cut off a little bit.
So you have to realize that in our first study, we were guessing what is the right dosage. We're guessing what is the right duration. So we made good guesses and we had good benefit, but it's probably not optimal guesses. So in our future studies, we hope to improve on optimizing dosing, figure out how long to treat for, is longer treatment better, and our maintenance dose is better. So we hope to see even more improvement in future studies. There's certainly a potential for that. So we do have a lot to learn still from those. In regard to what you were saying about the very complex mechanism by which this treatment works, our gut bacteria affect us in many different ways. So part of what we think is happening is that by improving your gut bacteria, you're better able to digest your food. You're clearly having much less diarrhea or constipation. This treatment treats both of those conditions. It just normalizes your stools. And so then you're having a lot less pain and discomfort. And so just because of that, imagine how miserable you are if you've been constipated for a few days or a week. What if you've had that condition for years? And so just removing the pain and discomfort, we think, is going to help the person feel better. We think it's a lot more than that. Your gut bacteria make key vitamins. We've shown that children with autism are low, especially in biotin, which is made largely by your gut bacteria. And so we think that's part of what's going on. And then also, most of your serotonin is made in your gut. Your gut also makes other neurotransmitters that can directly affect the brain. But one of the most important things we think is going on is pathogenic bacteria, bad bacteria such as Clostridia that can cause major GI problems, but can also cause major neurological problems. That these bad bacteria like Clostridia produce toxins that can go to the brain and directly affect functioning. And part of the reason we think that's so important is that when we first treat with vancomycin, the kids actually get a little worse. The irritability and hyperactivity get worse in about 2/3 of the kids for just a few days, usually right at the very start of vanco. That what's happening, we think, is that as the bad gut bacteria die off, they release all their toxins all at once. So the symptoms they were causing get worse and then get better. And so we think this die-off reaction is a major clue that it's these bad bacteria that are causing these symptoms. And we know that it's the kids who have worse of these symptoms to begin with, worse hyperactivity, worse irritability. These are the kids who probably have more of those bad gut bacteria and will tend to have more of a reaction, and there's probably more hope for them to improve. So that's what we think is going on in terms of the mechanism. Killing off these bad gut bacteria and then reseeding with beneficial bacteria to prevent the bad bacteria from regrowing. A good simple analogy, it's like if you have a garden filled with weeds. The antibiotic wipes out all the weeds, but if we stop there, what's going to happen? The weeds are just going to regrow. So we need to both remove the weeds with the antibiotic and then replant with beneficial bacteria, so the beneficial bacteria, their new plants, grow and flourish in our garden.
And this is, I have a mentoring program. I work with parents in over 40 countries now, and I can definitely say that the ones who show the worst, like when they start the process, and I always make sure that there's binders in place and that they've got liver and lymphatic support for the detoxification, because our kids usually have a backed up liver. It's congested livers. But the ones who have the worst die-off symptoms definitely show that they had initially worse problems. So, but then once that's why we want to go really slowly. It's important for parents to know that too. You want to detoxify slowly because you don't want to stress the system and these toxins dumping out as they're doing so, and support the body. But how much better the kids will get once you go through that die-off symptom. So it is important for parents to know you can get worse before you get better. But if they're getting too much worse, you want to be able to gauge how fast you're moving forward. I always caution parents, of course, under your guidance, if they were in one of your programs, that I'm sure that you're working with those people too, and making sure that's sort of a process for the body. And then people might be wondering too, okay, so what about probiotics? You're using these fecal transplant therapies and things, putting that in from Microbiota. So how does it compare with using, say, a probiotic?
So typical probiotics are anywhere from 1 to 10 strains of bacteria, but your gut has of order 1,000 to 2,000 species of bacteria. So kids with autism are missing several hundred species. So giving just 1 or 2 strains back isn't probably going to have much effect. Plus, they're probably the wrong strains. Standard probiotics are the ones that grow in milk, not the ones that grow in your gut.
Right. The type of probiotic is really, really important. Knowing that you're getting the right strains, knowing that those can make sure that they can live through the stomach acid, that they can live through the heat of the body, that there's a lot of survival that they need to be going under. A lot of people are looking at probiotics, and there's so many on the market, and there's so many bad ones on the market. So I will share next week's show will be on some of the things that I can give some good resources for that with parents as well, and I can link to some things on my website. On our show page at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/46, I can add some of those as well. But we need to take a short break right here. Again, you're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism. Stay with us. All right, hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas, and today we are talking about microbiota transplant therapy for treating GI problems in children with autism spectrum disorders. And we have Dr. James Adams here with us, who to is a research specialist from Arizona State University, and they are continuing their research in this field and having phenomenal success, which is really, really exciting. We were just finishing with a little bit on the comparison of probiotics. So do you have something you want to just finish up what your thought was before we took the break there on that, and then we'll maybe talk about your future studies?
Yeah. So there have been several studies of probiotics for autism. These are limited studies. They suggest that some of them may have some benefit, but we have a lot to learn about what are the optimal strains. And again, the problem is people with autism seem to need hundreds of strains. Standard probiotics have only 1 to 10 or so. And so really, that's why microbiota transplant from a healthy donor really seems like the right way, a much more complete way to go. In terms of our future studies, because of the success of our child study, we received a large grant from the federal government, over $1 million, to do a study for treating adults with autism. So we've already treated 18 adults with autism, and we have plans to treat another 66 adults. We're waiting for a little bit of additional funding, and then we'll go ahead and continue with that. We've had huge interest. We've had hundreds of applications just for the adult study alone. It's unlike our phase 1 study for children, which was open label. This study is going to be a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study. That's the gold standard for research studies, to see if the treatment group does better than the group that gets the sugar pills, that the placebo, and everyone's blinded, so no one knows who is getting the real treatment, who is getting the placebo. The parents don't know, the researchers don't know. And so that will really be a critical step in proving that this treatment works. If that's successful, then that brings us a step closer to getting FDA approval. The FDA has already awarded us fast-track status, saying that they realize that this is a promising, not proven, but promising treatment for a disorder, GI problems, and autism that we don't have good treatments for today. So we're very excited about that FDA approval. And so we're moving ahead with that adult study. We're just finishing up the fundraising for that. And then we've had many requests, over 1,000 requests for families who want to be in a future child study. So we've submitted a request to the FDA to do another child study. We're awaiting feedback from them on that, but because we've already done one child study, we think it'll be very similar. That will be a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled study, but the placebo group will then be switched to the real treatment, so everyone will get the real treatment. We think we'll have even better dosing and duration in that study, so we hope we have at least as good and possibly better outcome than even our first study. But the key feature is we don't have funding for that yet, so we're about to launch a fundraising campaign, probably in 1 to 2 weeks. In order to do a 50-person study, we need to raise about $800,000. These clinical trials are very expensive. The FDA needs us to do them very rigorously, but if that's successful, that will be a phase 2 study. If that succeeds, then we can ask the FDA to allow us to do a phase 3 study. That involves typically 500 to 1,000 people at 10 to 20 sites around the country. So it's like a phase 2 study, just many of them. And if that's successful, then we can ask the FDA to approve it and make it available to everyone in the country. So that's our goal, is to get this treatment approved by the FDA. Then it would be covered by insurance, because it will be an expensive treatment, but then it can be covered by insurance and available, we hope, to everyone with autism. So that's sort of our big master plan.
That's amazing. And so I'm sure there are a lot of people, pounding down your phone lines, and we'll definitely give some links. You can share where, if somebody is interested in applying to have their child be in that study, or if they're interested in getting microbiota transplant therapy done, where people can go for that. do you want to give those options now? Or you have contact information for people where they can go for those two things? Are they one location or is it two separate places?
So let me explain. So we are currently accepting applications for our adult study, but we are accepting them in chronological order, so it's not clear that we'll have openings left. But if people want to apply, they just go to autism.asu.edu, short for education. So autism.asu.edu, they can go there to apply for our adult study. They can also go there to get onto a contact list to be contacted about if we're successful in raising money for a child study. Then we will tell people on our contact list about that study, and then at that point they can actually apply. So we can't accept applications for the child study yet because it's not funded. It's in the process of being approved for our new child study, but they can go to the same website for more information on that, or for more information if they want to read our papers or see some of the other links to talks we've given.
Yeah, I know you've given some. You've got some great links there as well for more information on this, and it's great that you're also having success with adults as well as children. Because a lot of people write me, their kid might be 25 years old. Some people their child is 41, 42 years old, and they're asking about it. And I believe it's never too late. I mean, how the level of recovery will vary, of course, for every child anywhere at any time from any treatment, but children can get better and adults can get better and people can feel better, because a lot of them with this type of gut bacteria, they're just not healthy. I mean, a lot of them aren't able to absorb the nutrients from the foods that they're eating. And so then their bodies and their brain are starving and they're having all these other health issues, and their teeth are bad because they don't have enough minerals in their system. And it's just, one thing spiraling to another, but the central nervous system and the brain basically starving as well, and that's why it just can't function properly. So we're going to take a short break right here, but when we come back, we'll kind of wrap up with a couple of things that I know that you also have coming for the future as well, Dr. Adams, which is pretty exciting. So you're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas. Stay with us.
Have you ever wondered why some children recover from their symptoms of autism while others never seem to get any better? After 13 years of research, Karen Thomas has recovered her own son from his symptoms of autism naturally. She now shares how she did it with you in her free webinar so that you can have the right resources and knowledge to help your child. The definition of recovery is to regain health. Karen offers this to you in 4 stages: healing the gut, natural heavy metal detoxification, balancing the co-infections of autism, brain support, and repair. Register now for this free webinar to help you know what you can do to help your child to sleep better, be more calm, improve focus, and reach their fullest potential to live a happy, healthy life. Go to naturallyrecoveringautism.com/free workshop, empowering parents with the resources to naturally recover autism from a mom who's done it.
Hi there, and welcome back to Naturally Recovering Autism, and we're talking with Dr. James B. Adams today about microbiota transplant therapy for treating GI problems in children with autism spectrum disorders. And I will link to the resource that Dr. Adams just gave as well for being able to contact, to learn more, get more accessibility to some of the research studies and everything, and also where you could apply if you were interested in having your child be involved in a study. And I'll put everything on the show notes at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/46. The number's 46. And Dr. Adams, before the break, we were talking about where people can go again for if they want to apply or get involved in a study. But is it possible for somebody to be getting the microbiota transplant therapy for their child now if they want to go pay for it somewhere?
The FDA has not yet approved microbiota transplant for any condition. They only allow it to be used in the U.S. for people who have recurrent C. diff infection. So after it occurs once, if it comes back a second time, then it can be treated. But it is not allowed to be used for children with autism or for any other condition. And so That's why we're doing our research studies to get FDA approval. Part of the reason is that a number of years ago when blood transfusions were being done, my mother received a blood transfusion. She caught hepatitis C from it, and she died from it. So we do have to be cautious with blood transfusions. We have to be cautious with microbiota transfusions. You want to get very carefully screened material. We mentioned, again, the danger of 2 people getting very sick and 1 dying from a donor who wasn't carefully screened and from people who had compromised immune systems. Thousands of people have had microbiota transplant. It's generally very safe, but in rare cases, problem can occur, so we do need to be cautious.
Right. Okay. That's very, very important to know. I mean, I know sometimes parents get really eager about something new and they're hearing all these fantastic things about it, like we've just mentioned, and they might look at sources that could be risky or really aren't safe because it's not tested out yet, or the source that they're getting it from isn't a good one. And so that's very, very important to know as a parent. And so you've got these studies coming up for adults. You're looking at funding for a children's study that you've got coming up. And I know that there is both a GoFundMe account and alternate donations for ASU Foundation at PitchFinder. I have linked to both of those on the page for the show notes today. If you are interested at all in donating for Dr. Adams' research on these microbiota transplants for children with autism, then again, that link will be at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/46. And this is really, really groundbreaking work. So again, if you're interested in donating, you can get that link on that page there and share it with friends and anybody you know who might be interested as well. And thank you, Dr. Adams, so much for being here with us today. I greatly appreciate your time and your expertise and all that you have to share with us. And I know you have some comprehensive nutritional intervention studies coming up as well, correct?
That's right. We actually completed a comprehensive nutritional intervention study. We found great benefits, not as great as for microbiota transplant, but still 30% reduction in GI symptoms, 7-point gain in IQ, gaining a year of development. So lots of good benefits. And now we have a protocol for that we recommend to families.
Okay. I think that sounds like something that could be great to do, maybe a discussion about here in the future, because I know nutrition is such a big part of it, and a lot of people now understanding this connection between the gut and the brain can maybe make sure that they know how important it is. I mean, some people think, it's probably, matters somewhat, but they don't realize, but they don't take it seriously enough. They don't really realize how vitally important the gut is to the brain and nutrition. I mean, food basically is medicine. So that I would look forward to as well in the future. And again, thank you so much for being here with us today. I greatly appreciate your time and your expertise. And yeah, hopefully we'll have you back again in the future.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a great week. And next week we'll be giving some information. We talked a little bit about probiotics. And I have a researcher who is a specialist in that arena, and next week's show will be a discussion on that as well. So tune in for that. Until then, have a great week. Take care. You're listening to Naturally Recovering Autism. I'm your host, Karen Thomas. And again, the show notes for today are at naturallyrecoveringautism.com/46. Just the numbers 46.